Tonight, we travel to a place without maps, a village that exists only in memory and imagination, a shallow valley, hidden away from the eyes of kings and travelers. You cannot find it on any chart, and no traveler speaks of it without hesitation. The trees crowd around it like sentinels, ancient and slow-moving, as if they have been watching the same lives repeat for centuries. The fields stretch in uneven patches, some green, some brown, tilled to exhaustion and left only briefly to rest. This is where you were born. This is where you will die. Here, life is slow, measuring the ache of your back. The suns climb across the sky and the rhythm of the seasons. There is no hurry, only endurance. The homes lean gently into the wind, walls of mud and straw patched endlessly. Roofs sag under their own weight, leaking in places unreachable without effort. The smell is a mix of wet wool, smoke from cooking fires, earthy soil, and a faint sour tang of livestock. You have grown up with it, and it has grown on you. Life here is raw and tactile. Every wall tells a story of winter storms survived. Every patch of thatch a testament to repeated effort. Nothing is perfect. Nothing needs to be. And yet, each family claims their little corner, their home, as if it were the center of the universe. The road that leads to this place is no road at all, just deep grooves carved into mud by oxen wheels. Rainwater collects there, along with the buzzing of mosquitoes. No important travelers tread here. Perhaps none have ever come. It is a path defined by absence rather than presence. Most days, it remains silent, save for the occasional clop of a goat or the whisper of wind through tall grass. You measure journeys not in miles, but in how long it takes to feel the mud underfoot or the sun climbing overhead. And in this quiet world, the world outside the trees feels distant, almost mythical. Time is not counted by clocks, for there are none. The distant bell from a neighboring chapel drifts faintly through the air when the wind allows. Otherwise, you measure yourself. The sun climbing high, casting long shadows that stretch across the fields, or the ache in your back before noon. Life is paced by work, by the slow rotation of seasons, by the rise and fall of hunger and rest. There is no rush here, no urgency, only the quiet rhythm of survival and repetition. Every village needs a figure of guidance, even if it is only symbolic. Here, that role falls to Tom, the elder. He once spoke to a monk, and now carries that conversation like a crown of knowledge. No one challenges him, not because they fear him, but because they have seen his goat remain healthy and his hut intact. Leadership here is subtle, practical, and rarely spoken. A nod, a loaf of bread, a shrug. These are the tools of authority. No one seeks more. No one needs more. Life moves quietly. Only a dozen families fill this valley. Everyone knows everyone, and everyone knows the limits of polite curiosity. Problems exist, of course, but disputes are simple: a short argument, a loaf of bread passed back and forth, and eventually peace. There's no need for written laws or fines. Boundaries are as natural as the old elm tree or the soft ground near the river. Life is guided not by rules on paper, but by mutual understanding and necessity. Strangers are rare here, and when one arrives, curiosity and caution collide. Who are they? What do they want? Are they cursed or merely lost? Even the smell of salt on their clothes is enough to start questions that last for weeks. Their presence is a ripple in the quiet pond of village life, and everyone notices, though few speak directly to them. Change comes slowly here, and every new face is a small disturbance in the enduring rhythm of survival. The forest surrounds a village, ancient and unyielding. Its edge is where the known world ends. Trees are thick, their trunks wide, roots tangle like veins beneath the soil. You can hear the occasional crack of a branch, the rustle of hidden animals, but the forest keeps its secrets. Villagers respect it, fearing its depth, its silence, and its patience. Here, life is small and fleeting, but the forest is vast and enduring. It is both protector and threat, a quiet witness to every generation that has lived and died here. Somewhere to the north, the river flows. You have never seen it, yet its presence is whispered in the same tones used to speak of dragons or saints. It is both real and imagined, a distant mystery that shapes your understanding of the world. Water runs far beyond your home, carrying tales and dangers that never reach this small valley. Life here is isolated, yet the river reminds you that the world is larger, wilder, and uncontained. And so life continues. Long days, short nights, repeated over and over. There is no glory, no fame, no record written in ink. Only survival, community, and the quiet persistence of human endurance. Each day blends into the next, the ache in your muscles and the comfort of familiarity marking the passing of time. Here, at the edge of history, there is peace, simple and enduring. It is slow, it is quiet, and it is enough. Out there, beyond the hills and forest, lie towns and cities. Stories say their stone buildings rise 2 or even 3 stories high. But these are tales, like talking animals or women who turn into birds. You cannot miss a world you have never seen. The forest is dense. The hills are long. Roads, if they exist, are known more for bandits and bad luck than for promise. Even if you tried to leave, you wouldn't know the language, the customs, or the coins to trade. Perhaps that is why you stay. Safety lies in the familiar. You know the rhythm of your home. The sag of the roof, the location of firewood, the patch of sky that tells when the sheep must come in. Here, life is contained, manageable, predictable, and that, strangely, is enough. Life revolves around routine. You wake with the light and sleep when it fades, working in between. Stews bubble for days. The roof leaks sometimes, the well runs low, yet the rhythm of tasks offers comfort. You know who to ask when a fence collapses, which wood is dry enough for the fire, how long to leave the barley to dry in the sun. There is a quiet satisfaction in this knowledge. It does not promise excitement or fame, but it does promise survival. Each day passes, each task completed, each field tended, and in that repetition, there's a steady, grounding peace, a kind of stillness that the world beyond the trees can never offer. Once in a while, news drifts in. A king has died. A war rages. A comet lights the sky in a village 5 days' walk away. These events travel slowly, diluted by countless mouths along the way. By the time you hear them, urgency has vanished. They are stories, curiosities, whispers rather than commands. Time itself is different here. Seasons don't arrive neatly. A damp spring bleeds into a wet summer. A hard frost becomes a winter that gnaws through your boots. You do not count years. You count harvests, good ones, bad ones, and the rare ones that make life feel lighter for a week. Occasionally, the steward comes from afar. His job is to collect grain and record the harvest. You answer carefully, offering only necessary details, for he does not favor excess. You have never met the king, though his name is spoken in prayers, just in case it matters. Life at the edge of the map is mostly unchanged. The steward reminds you that rules exist far away, but they are abstract, distant, and fragile. Here, survival is practical, measured in work completed and food preserved. The half-glowing hearth and the mostly sound roof matter more than any distant decree. In a lifetime, you will walk hundreds of miles, but almost all of them in circles. Most people in the medieval countryside never venture beyond a few miles from home. Not from lack of curiosity, nor energy, nor boots, which are often scarce, but because the world beyond the next hill does not belong to them. Even the idea of leaving feels impossible, like trying to fly. You memorize every path, every tree stump, every footprint in the mud. These details form the borders of your world. Beyond them, everything is theoretical, distant, and unclaimed. The nearby village might be only 5 miles away, but it may as well be a foreign land. You know the names of every patch of land, every animal, every familiar stone. Footprints tell stories of who passed by, and the well-worn paths mark the limits of exploration. This familiarity is its own kind of safety. The world beyond is uncertain, dangerous, and unwelcome. You stay not because you cannot leave, but because life is manageable here, and there is a quiet satisfaction in knowing your boundaries. The forest, the hills, and the fields protect you as much as they confine you. Life is measured in harvests, not years. The dry harvest when rye blackened in the rain. The heavy barley harvest that brings temporary joy. Even old Marjorie smiled for a week after one such bounty. These cycles define existence here. They are more important than kings, wars, or distant events. Each harvest offers sustenance, continuity, and proof that life endures. Here, joy is fleeting but tangible. The rhythm of work and reward gives a village its stability. The land itself is a calendar, the ruler and the record keeper. Here at the edge of the map, most things do not change. And when they do, it is rarely for better. Yet the half-glowing hearth, the roof that mostly holds, and the warmth of the cottage provide reassurance. Tomorrow, the sun will rise over the same hills, and the cycle continues. Life may be small, circular, and repetitive, but it is life nonetheless. In this simplicity, there's a strange, enduring peace, the kind that does not ask questions and does not demand more than you can see from the top of the nearest hill. You have curiosity, yet it is contained. You know the names of every hill, tree, and stream within your reach. Beyond that, knowledge is theoretical. A nearby village may hold strangers, new stories, or rare goods, but the paths to reach them are long, uncertain, and often dangerous. Life's focus remains on what you can touch, see, and influence. Curiosity exists, but is tempered by the reality of survival. In this boundary lies comfort. The reassurance of the familiar is safe and manageable, and that life, even circumscribed, is enough. And so, life goes on. Long days, short nights, repeated endlessly. There is no fame, no legacy, only survival, community, and the steady rhythm of work. Each day blends into the next. Each harvest marks the passage of time. And within this quiet repetition lies a deep, enduring peace. It is not dramatic. It is not remarkable, but it is enough. Here, at the edge of history, life persists gentle and steady, like the slow turn of the sun across the hills. And for now, that is all that matters. You've heard stories about life beyond the village, who married whom, who stole a goat, which priests snore during Mass, but you have never seen it, and you likely never will, because travel is dangerous here. Not thrilling, not adventurous, but quiet, exhausting, and possibly fatal. Roads are not lined with signs or inns. They are muddy tracks through forest, fields, and long stretches of empty, silent land. No maps, no guides, just vague advice. Go until you see the leaning pine tree, then turn left past a stone that looks like a sleeping pig. Even with instructions, you know the dangers that lie ahead. The forest is alive, but not friendly. Medieval forests aren't romantic or welcoming. They are dark, tangled with roots, and filled with noises you cannot always identify. Wolves, boars, and strangers who do not want to be found. Everything in the woods tests you. If you weren't born into it, it doesn't tolerate you. Each step carries a possibility of injury, getting lost, or worse. Every rustle of leaves or snap of a twig could be a predator or a bandit waiting for someone foolish enough to wander alone. Here, caution is survival, and curiosity can be deadly. Bandits roam the countryside. People with nothing to lose, nothing to farm, nothing to tie them down. Travelers are vulnerable, especially if they look even faintly well-fed. Confidence does not protect you. A man walking with purpose might be assumed to carry coin. A woman traveling alone could have something worth stealing. Roads are not safe. They are lines of opportunity for those desperate enough to take it. Survival often comes down to knowing when to keep your head down and your belongings hidden. Out there, the world has no obligation to spare you. Getting lost is not a minor inconvenience. It is potentially fatal. If you wander off track, no one comes looking. Rivers cannot guide you reliably. Landmarks are few, and days may pass without seeing another soul. Your body could vanish into bracken, forgotten until the next feast day, when someone finally asks. And practical life doesn't pause. Fields still need tending. Animals still need feeding. The steward may arrive to collect taxes, and no explanation protects you from a ledger or a pen. Here, curiosity must contend with responsibility, and the world outside remains distant. Even if you somehow reach another village, what then? You are unexpected, unwelcome. Outsiders bring problems. Disease, strange customs, crime. Dialects differ, gestures confuse. Even spoons may be held wrongly. Hospitality is not universal. Beds are already full, food scarce. The safest place is home, not because it is entirely safe, but because it is familiar. You know the leaking roof, wandering chickens, and which neighbor will lend a tool without too many questions. Beyond the village, the world owes you nothing. Here, it owes you only what you take from it. Some travel does happen, though rarely for peasants. Merchants, monks, and messengers arrive once or twice a year, trailing carts of wool, salted fish, and stories behind them. They speak of cities where stone buildings rise high, streets bustle with people, and spices scent the air. It sounds impossible, unimaginable even. You listen carefully, absorbing these tales, but you do not dream too hard. You know the dangers of leaving home. Even if the stories are true, what would you do there? The city could swallow you, leaving your name unknown, your existence erased. You stay, not out of fear alone, though sometimes that too. You stay because work waits, a fence to mend, a niece to watch, barley to dry, animals to feed. A dozen small tasks that claim your day before the sun dips below the tree-line. Curiosity and imagination are tempered by responsibility. The world outside is vast, unknown, and indifferent. Here, within the village, you matter. Here, your labor has impact, your presence counted. The village is enough. That for now is all you need. The days repeat. You walk familiar paths, tend familiar animals, repair familiar fences. Life moves in circles, not straight lines. Hundreds of miles may pass beneath your feet over a lifetime, yet most of them are confined to the same few miles around the village. Beyond lies theory and danger. Within lies control, understanding, and routine. The trees, the roofs, the fields, they mark the limits of your world and, paradoxically, give you freedom. Here, the ordinary is enough, and the simple rhythm of work and rest is a comfort. There is joy here, subtle and quiet, knowing the land, tending animals, watching a well-tended field prosper. You sleep under the half-glowing hearth, rise to the warm sun over the hills. Safety is not absolute, but familiarity protects you. Here, you are known, your actions matter, and life is tangible. There is no grandeur, no renown, only continuity and the satisfaction of surviving another day. Even when hardship strikes, the cycle continues, and with it comes calm, quiet reassurance. So the world outside can wait. You do not need to venture beyond the hills or forests. Your home, your work, your community, these are enough. The village holds you, guides you, and keeps you safe in its quiet rhythm. Life here is not exciting or glamorous, but it is steady, known, and true. The fields, roofs, and familiar paths mark the edge of your world, and that is enough. Here you can breathe. Here you can rest. Here you are home. The village had it all: gossip, conflict, weather, sickness, and fleeting joys. Life followed the rhythm of bells, the turning of seasons, and the quiet pride of surviving another day. Sometimes you dreamed of seeing what lay beyond the woods. But most days, your thoughts were simpler. You hoped the stew didn't burn while fetching water, or that the roof didn't leak in another spot. People did leave, of course. Usually the desperate, the reckless, or the ambitious. A young man might wander in search of work, adventure, or cause. Some returned with a story, a limp, or neither. And when he didn't, no one said much. He went beyond the trees, was all, and somehow that explained everything. For those who stayed, life was small, but it was known. You weren't lonely exactly. Days were shared with family, neighbors, animals, and the land itself. There was comfort in repetition, in familiar complaints and routines. You didn't need to see a distant city to know warmth, taste cinnamon to know sweetbread, or cross a kingdom to feel love, sorrow, boredom, or hope. Years passed. Aches settled deeper into your joints, and the children grew taller than the fence posts. The idea of travel faded, not with regret, but with understanding. Some people were meant to move. You were meant to stay. There is no blueprint, no architect, no neatly labeled lumber waiting. Your home isn't a house in the ordinary sense. It is a compromise between shelter and weather, effort and decay, need and the reluctant gifts of the land. You begin with rough timbers, cut from nearby trees with worn tools. The wood bends, warps, and is never perfect. But it doesn't matter. Neither are your walls. Life itself is similar. Uneven patchwork, functional. You weave thin branches between the posts in a process called Lee. It is not quick, It is not elegant, but it holds. Enough to live within, enough to survive. Next comes a daub, a mix of mud, straw, manure, and water. You slap it on by hand, press it between the lee, smooth it just enough to keep the wind out. It dries slowly, cracks in the sun, and occasionally falls off in chunks that must be patched before winter. You get used to the smell. Eventually, you stop noticing it. Life itself feels like this, slapped together, imperfect, yet functional. You work with what you have. You repair, you maintain, you endure. And slowly, the walls take shape, imperfect, but strong enough to shield you from the world outside. The roof is thatch, layers of dried straw, packed tightly and tied to beams. When fresh, it is golden, almost beautiful. Then the rains come, birds settle, time passes. The gold fades, the edges fray, and holes appear where you never expected. Buckets are placed where drips threaten your daily life. You do not shingle it. You do not waterproof it. You patch, again and again, until the roof is more patched than original structure. At times, you wonder if it would be easier to live under a cart. Yet somehow, it shelters you imperfectly, reliably, and that is enough. The floor is dirt. You tell yourself it is firm. And with years of walking, sweeping, spilling, and stamping, it almost is. Every footstep presses it down. Every spill adds character. The house is alive in its imperfection. Each crack and bump tells a story. The smell of earth blends with the daub, the smoke on the hearth, and the livestock nearby. It is a sensory rhythm that marks daily life. You do not notice it after a while, but it remains a constant presence, grounding you, connecting you to the land, the labor, and the long chain of hands that built this home before yours. Outside, weather continues its quiet authority. Sun, rain, frost, wind, they shape your days, your fields, and your home. The hut leaks, the roof sags, the floor dampens, but you persist. Seasons roll over one another, bleeding together. Spring becomes summer. Frost turns to deep winter. Time is measured not in years, but in the work it demands, in the crops sown and reaped, in the animals fed, and the fences repaired. You do not rush. You cannot. Life is slow, demanding, and continuous. Yet, within the repetition, there is joy. Fleeting, simple, but real. The barley harvest comes in heavy and golden. A child laughs climbing the fence. A stew tastes particularly good today. Smoke curls from the hearth in the early morning. You notice these moments, small as they are. They do not erase hardship, but they balance it. They remind you that life here is enough. The village, the family, the animals, and the land, they form a steady circle. And within that circle, you find quiet contentment. As years pass, aches settle into your joints. Children grow taller than fence posts, and the idea of travel fades, not with regret, but with understanding. Some people are meant to move, to wander, to chase stories beyond the trees. You are meant to stay. You understand the value of routine, the importance of tending to familiar, and the quiet satisfaction of a day survived. Life is small, perhaps, but it is fully yours. The village, with all its imperfections, gossip, fleeting joys, and struggles, is enough. You live within mud and wood, straw and sweat, and for all its cracks, leaks, and frays, your home endures. You patch it, maintain it, and it holds. The smell of earth, the feel of rough timber, the warmth of the hearth, all these form a sanctuary. Outside, the forest waits, dense and indifferent, and the world beyond may never reach you. Yet here life persists, steady and reliable. It may be small, humble, and imperfect, but it is enough. The village is enough, and within its slow rhythm, there is peace. But when it rains, the floor softens again. When it freezes, it cracks. When the goats come in for the night, it's anyone's guess what is underfoot. You spread rushes or straw to cover it. It helps a little. Soon, the straw is damp, dirty, ground into dust. You sweep it out and start over. Or sometimes you don't. Eventually, the straw becomes part of the floor, accepted as a feature of the landscape. Windows are just openings, covered with wooden shutters that swing awkwardly and never close flush. Glass is too expensive, too rare. Wind, cold, and the sounds of animals drift in, sometimes even the animals themselves. The door hangs crooked from the frame, shifted during the last frost. It latches with a simple hook or peg, not for security. There is nothing to steal, but to keep chickens from wandering out and wind from wandering in. Life inside revolve around one shared space, maybe two if a linto or loft is added. One room where you sleep, eat, cook, men talk, argue, and hope. Everyone lives here. Parents, children, grandparents, cousins, even a neighbor's child whose parents are sick or gone. Life is communal, practical, and unromantic, but it works. A hearth stands in the center, built of stone if lucky, clay if not. Smoke rises through a hole in the roof. No chimney. The air is smoky, warm, damp, and carries a scent of stew reheated one too many times. Furniture is sparse. A table, a bench, a stool, maybe a chest if someone was skilled or fortunate. Beds or wooden frames stuffed with straw, or feathers shared, squeaking. While blankets are rough, heavy, never quite dry. Storage is in the rafters, garlic, onions, herbs, or a small ham if the pig was kind that year. You can smell the seasons change above your head. Animals are part of the household. The cow may sleep in a corner. Chickens wander. A goat shuffles in the night. It isn't ideal or sanitary, but it is warm. You learn to tune out their clucks, shuffles, and bleats. They become part of the background noise, like the wind in the thatch or the slow settling of the walls. Nothing is level. Floors dip, roofs slant, walls bulge. You fix what you can, ignore what you can't. Life is about adaptation, improvisation, and accepting the rhythm of survival as it comes. Every spring, you swear you'll repair the back wall. Every autumn, it still leans. It is not a house built to last, only to survive the next storm. And yet, for all its flaws, it is home. You know where the cold drafts come in, and how to block them with an old sack. You know which roof beam can hold a pot, and which one creaks under weight. You know how light falls through the slats in the afternoon, where the dog curls up to sleep and where the children play safely. To outsiders, it may seem poor, but to you, it is effort, resourcefulness, and victory. The smoke rises, carrying warmth and the smell of stew that has simmered for hours. Life in this one room is multi-layered. Cooking, sleeping, repairing, laughing, arguing. Every task overlaps. You navigate around the dirt floor, the animals, and each other, learning patience and care. Even the smallest victories, a fire that lights in the morning, a roof that holds through the rain, become celebrations. Survival is the achievement, repeated day after day, stitched together with effort and endurance. Outside, the seasons turn and shape life. Spring brings damp fields and growing crops. Summer dries the paths and warms the hearth. Autumn drags leaves and frost across the land. Winter bites through wool blankets and the thatch roof, cracks the floor, and tests your endurance. Yet inside, the rhythm persists. Tasks, meals, animal care, repairs, and conversations continue. The house breathes with the seasons, creaking, settling, and enduring alongside you. It is alive in its imperfection, a mirror of life itself. You learn to accept what cannot be fixed. The floor dips, the roof leaks, the walls bulge. You patch where possible, improvise where necessary, and let the rest be. Each repair is an act of care, each patch a temporary victory. The hut does not aspire to perfection, only to continuity. It holds life, warmth, and the family within. Over time, you come to understand that imperfection is not failure. It is survival. And survival, in this place and in this life, is its own triumph. When strangers pass through, they see poverty. You see effort, resourcefulness, and endurance. A roof that still stands is a victory. A fire that burns at dawn is a blessing. Each day survived adds to quiet pride. Life is not about grandeur, wealth, or recognition. It is about continuity, perseverance, and shared existence. The village, the hut, the hearth, the animals, and the land. This is the measure of your life, and within it there is peace. This is home, at the edge of the map. Imperfect, demanding, alive. Mud and straw, smoke and fire, animals and people, all woven into a rhythm of life that is small, steady, and enough. You do not travel. You do not seek grandeur. Here, survival is triumph, labor is dignity, and repetition is comfort. The village holds you, shelters you, and endures with you. Here, in the imperfect walls, under the patched roof, life persists quietly, steadily, beautifully. This is enough. This is home. A dry corner is worth more than gold. And when you lie down at the end of the day, surrounded by snores, silence, smoke, and straw, a strange kind of comfort settles in. Not pride exactly, but presence. This is your space. It bends, it leaks, it shifts in the wind, but it holds. And so have you. For the average medieval peasant, food was not a joy. It was a problem. Repeated daily, using the same worn ingredients, the same tired hope that something edible might come of it. Every meal was a small act of survival, a testament to endurance. Your kitchen, if it could be called that, was a corner near the hearth. No shelves of ingredients, no hanging herbs in sunlight, just a pot, a fire, and a short list of things that hadn't spoiled. At the center of nearly every meal was pottage, a kind of eternal stew, never fully new, never fully gone. You added to it during the day, skimmed it at night, and prayed nothing strange grew in it when your back was turned. Ingredients depended on the harvest. Cabbage, leeks, barley, legumes, maybe garlic or onions. In winter, dried beans or peas. Sometimes salted pork, more often a single bone boiled for days, remembering what meat tasted like. You didn't eat pottage for pleasure. You ate it because it was what you had. Warm food at day's end was more than comfort. It was a small victory. The pot was never truly clean. Scraped, wiped, but rarely scrubbed. Each batch absorbed remnants of the last. No spices, no vinegar, just a slow, dependable dullness. Bread was the other mainstay. Dense, hard, dark loaves of rye, barley, or oats. Wheat was reserved for the upper classes. Peasant bread barely rose, crumbled easily, and sometimes a chaff, leftover peas, or even tree bark mixed in during famine. It filled the stomach, soaked up the stew, and kept you alive. In desperate times, tree bark was mixed into flour to stretch the meager supply. The bread was bitter, dense, barely digestible, but it kept you alive. Slices of old bread, called trenches, served as plates, soaking up stew and eventually fed animals or passed to someone lower in status. Even in scarcity, hierarchy existed. Protein was rare. Chickens laid eggs, cows gave milk. Livestock wasn't eaten unless necessary. Nothing was wasted: meat, fat, organs, bones, even blood for puddings. Pork was most common when available. Every scrap mattered. Every resource turned to sustenance. Every day a careful negotiation with scarcity. Life in the village revolved around these daily acts. Cooking, feeding, tending animals, repairing and maintaining. Each meal a victory, each repair a temporary success. You rose with the sun, prepared the hearth, fed the livestock, checked fences, tended the fields, and returned to the pot. Small rhythms marked the day, the week, the seasons. Hardship was constant, yet manageable, interspersed with fleeting joys. A heavy barley harvest, a child's laugh, a warm bed at night. In the quiet repetition, there was a profound satisfaction, a steady heartbeat of survival. Everyone shared the same space. Parents, children, grandparents, cousins, a neighbor's child, all coexisted in a single room, moving around fires, beds, and animals. Space was shared. Air was smoky, warmth uneven, but life persisted. You learned each nook and crevice, which beams could hold weight, which floors were soft, and where the light fell in the afternoon. There was a quiet understanding, a rhythm born of cohabitation and necessity. Every small victory, patching the roof, starting the fire, filling the pot, was a celebration of endurance. Every day required effort. Gathering firewood, tending animals, mending tools, repairing roofs, walking to the well. Fatigue was constant yet expected. Each laborious act was a contribution to survival. Nothing could be left undone. Life outside these walls was unknown and risky, but inside, labor created stability. It was repetitive, exhausting, yet grounding. Survival was measured in completed tasks, not in fame or wealth. Small victories, keeping the roof patched, feeding the livestock, keeping the pottage simmering, were celebrated quietly, inwardly, and fully appreciated. Meals were rituals of survival, Pottage stirred carefully, bread sliced and shared, bones boiled to extract every bit of flavor. Even scarcity held its patterns. The hearth provided warmth, and the pot's smell guided the day's rhythm. Every sip of broth, every bite of dense bread was a small reward, a daily reaffirmation that life continued. You didn't eat for pleasure, you ate to persist. And in that repetition, in that careful attention, there was a subtle, comforting pattern, a certainty in an uncertain world. And at night, when the work paused, the hearth burned low and the animals settled, you laid down in your straw bed. The hut bent and leaked, shifted in the wind, but it held. You had held. 2. Presence replaced pride. Life was simple, repetitive, sometimes harsh, but it was yours. The village, the hut, the hearth, the pottage, the bread, the animals, all of it together formed a steady, small, comforting world. You closed your eyes, knowing you had survived another day, and in that there was peace. Here, at the edge of the map, life persisted. Small victories stacked upon one another. A roof patched, a stew simmered, a loaf of bread baked, a fence repaired. Nothing grand, nothing permanent, just continuity. And in that continuity, there was triumph, not celebrated in song or story, but known, felt, and lived. The village held you. The hut sheltered you. The hearth warmed you. Life, imperfect and humble, endured. And that, for the medieval peasant, was enough. Pigs were efficient, and their salted fat flavored many dishes, turning something barely edible into something vaguely pleasant. But pigs were slaughtered only when necessary. A whole pig required weeks of planning. Salting, hanging, boiling, and storing. Fish was an option if you lived near water, but rivers and lakes were controlled by lords. Fishing without permission could earn a fine, or worse. When you did fish, it was for eels, small river fish, or anything that would keep. Salted herring, if you could obtain it, was a prize. Life was a negotiation with resources and rules, balancing survival and legality. The church dictated much of your diet. On Fridays and during Lent, meat was forbidden. You pivoted to fish, or went without, in creative loopholes. Beaver tails were considered fish, a subtle theological workaround few questioned. Milk was common, but fragile. You use it quickly, or turn it into cheese or butter. Butter was a luxury, cheese tangy and dry. A generous cow meant a few good rounds stored away, treasure for weeks. Yet dairy didn't always agree with the body. Sour milk was used, butter went rancid, cheese molded. You cut away the worst parts and hoped your stomach was stronger than the bacteria. Water was unreliable, often unsafe depending on the season and upstream neighbors. Ale became the default drink. Weak ale or small beer was brewed at home and consumed by everyone, even children. It had low alcohol, enough to kill bacteria and dull thirst. If you had apples or pears, you might make cider. Wine was reserved for clergy and nobility. Mead was rare. Milk was for the young and sick. Otherwise, ale accompanied every meal, breakfast, lunch, and dinner, a daily ritual to soften the edges of monotonous life. Vegetables formed the bulk of your diet. Cabbage, onions, garlic, turnips, and leeks. Carrots existed, but not the orange kind we know, mostly white or purple. Gardens were small, tended carefully, eaten root to leaf. Nothing went to waste. Turnip tops boiled into greens, skins composted or tossed into the fire. Fruit was seasonal, apples, berries, maybe wild plums. Dried fruit lasted through winter, otherwise eaten fast. Preserving was difficult. Sugar was nearly impossible to afford. Honey, if you had bees, was treasured. Otherwise, pottage remained savory in the loosest sense of the word. Herbs were grown when possible. Parsley, sage, dill, mint. They weren't used primarily for flavor, but for medicine, tradition, and protection. Some herbs were believed to prevent illness, others to ward off pests. Occasionally, they added a hint of taste, but that was accidental, not the goal. The careful tending of a small garden, the drying of herbs, and the inclusion of even a few leaves in meals was a ritual, a blend of practicality, superstition, and survival instinct. Meals were communal. Benches around the fire, a shared pot, and bread sliced and distributed. No courses, no recipes, just Sustenance. You ate quietly, because complaining didn't make the stew thicker. Special occasions. A feast, a wedding, a harvest festival, or a saint's day allowed for a bird roasted or a pie baked. Medieval pies were not delicate pastries. They were hard, sealed dough boxes, often spiced if spices were available, usually scarce. The goal was containment, preservation, and sometimes flavor, but always sustenance. Food was never abundant. Every meal required planning, patience, and acceptance. When a pie or roasted bird appeared, it was a celebration, but tempered by scarcity. Every portion was precious. Children learned to eat carefully, adults to ration, and elders to advise. Even joy was measured against practicality. Yet in these moments, the community gathered, sharing the bounty, acknowledging the work that went into producing it. Scarcity bred both caution and appreciation, a quiet lesson repeated daily. Despite monotony, food could bring subtle joys: a soft loaf of rye, a well-cooked pottage, a rare piece of salted pork. These moments were small, quiet, and fleeting, but they punctuated life with brief relief. Meals weren't about pleasure in a modern sense. They were markers of survival, comfort, and community. They taught patience, endurance, and gratitude, however modest. Each bite, each swallow, was a reminder that life persisted, that another day could be survived, and that the rhythm of the village would continue. Every meal required planning. Salted pork had to be monitored, pottage stirred and supplemented, herbs dried and stored, bread baked and rationed. Preservation was a constant concern. Life depended on anticipating shortages, using every resource wisely, and preparing for the inevitable scarcity of winter. Every preserved item, every stored ingredient, was an insurance policy, a promise that even in difficult times, the village could endure and its people could survive. When the meal ended, the pot partially emptied, breadcrumbs on the table, the fire low, you reflected on what had been achieved. Another day survived, another meal prepared, another night approaching with warmth, shelter, and presence. Life at the edge of the map was small, repetitive, and harsh, but also steady and certain. Every small victory, every preserved ingredient, every shared bite was a testament to resilience, resourcefulness, and quiet endurance. This was enough. You might flavor your pottage with pepper, ginger, or cinnamon if someone had traded well, but most days weren't feast days. Most days were quiet. You scraped your bowl, soaked your bread, drank your ale, and leaned back, full enough to make it through the evening, if not entirely satisfied. There was comfort in repetition, knowing what the pot would taste like, knowing how much bread remained, watching the same hands prepare the same meal by the same fire. As the wind whispered through cracks, and the animals shifted in their sleep, the stew boiled, the bread cooled, and once again you had enough. If you were a medieval peasant, you owned little: a patch of land, a few tools, a couple of animals, a crooked house you built, but none of it truly yours. It all belonged to the Lord, the local landholder living up the hill with a slightly sturdier roof and better food. Owning land meant owning everything upon it, including you. You were a villain, not an insult, but a category. You worked the land without owning it. You couldn't leave without permission. You couldn't freely pass it on. You owed labor, goods, and deference. You weren't a slave, but you weren't free either. Obligation defined your life. You didn't speak directly to the Lord. You spoke to his steward, the man who managed the land and meticulously recorded what everyone owed. You owed a lot: labor, goods, produce. The steward's ledger governed your life. He knew when you tilled the Lord's fields, delivered a portion of your grain, or handed over eggs, wool, or a pig. The Lord wanted more than a share. He wanted control. Every act, every harvest, every animal was accounted for. Your life was measured not by freedom, but by obligation. Labor was the most constant debt. Corvée labor, days spent working the Lord's fields instead of your own, required no payment, no thanks. Only the quiet knowledge that somewhere, someone in the manor house benefited from your toil. Taxes arrived in many forms: a share of grain, wool, a chicken, eggs, ale, or pork. Even rivers and mills belonged to the Lord. Grinding grain or fishing without permission was punishable. Rules weren't meant to be fair, They were meant to enforce control. Every task, every chore, every moment of labor was under scrutiny. The Lord owned the communal oven and the mill. You paid to use them. Grinding grain by hand or baking at home without permission was illegal. Even when using the official way was slower, costlier, or made less sense, it was safer. Control was the point. Every rotation of the millstone, every loaf baked in the oven, every item taxed was a reminder. Your life, your efforts, and your yield existed within the boundaries set by someone else. Freedom was measured in the absence of punishment, not the presence of choice. Fees touched everything. Marrying, inheriting your father's plot, moving to another village, all required permission and payment. Livestock, tools, even the right to breed were taxed. Everything was accounted for. The steward ensured compliance. You learned early to do things officially, to accept inefficiency and cost as part of life. Control wasn't personal, it was systemic. Your village, your labor, your food, your life, all were threads woven tightly into the Lord's authority. And what did the Lord provide in return? Protection, in theory. Men at arms to defend against bandits or rival nobles. Grain from storehouses, though rarely for free, if famine struck. A court to settle disputes, a neighbor's goat in your garden, a boundary argument, again, not for free. Feudalism was a system of obligations, control, and intermittent protection. You learned to navigate it, to fulfill duties, and to survive within a framework that demanded loyalty, labor, and compliance. Life in the village moved at a rhythm set by labor, obligation, and the turning of seasons. Days were measured in tasks: feeding animals, tending crops, preparing pottage, delivering tithes. Seasons defined the work: planting, harvesting, repairing roofs, preserving food. Feast days and festivals punctuated the calendar, but most days were repetition, quiet and relentless. Yet there was a rhythm, a kind of stability, a quiet endurance that became familiar. You worked, you ate, you slept, and slowly, the pattern itself became comforting. Most days were small victories: a patch of roof mended, a pot simmering, bread baked, a fence repaired. Survival was measured in these acts. You didn't seek glory, only continuity. Each small success, each meal prepared, each obligation met, was proof of life persisting. You learned patience, endurance, and careful observation. The world was vast, often harsh, but within the village, within the hut, within the rhythm, there was certainty. Small, quiet, enduring certainty. As night fell, the wind whispered to the trees, the animals settled, the hearth glowed low. You lay on a straw bed, reflecting on another day of labor, obligation, and survival. The Lord had his control, the steward his ledger, the village its rhythm, and still you had endured. The roof held, the pottage remained, the bread was enough. Life was modest, repetitive, constrained, but it was steady, and in that steadiness, there was a subtle triumph, a quiet peace, and a reminder that surviving another day was itself a victory. A system of obligations and hierarchy wrapped in the language of loyalty and protection. In practice, it was ownership. The land was everything. Those who owned it ruled. Those who worked it obeyed. The manor stood apart, often on higher ground, larger than any peasant home, roof thatched thick against the wind. Inside, tapestries, tables, servants, and the Lord, eating meals unimaginable to you. Thinking little of you, he might not know your name, but he knew your numbers, how much barley you owed, how many eggs, whether your son was ready for labor. Everything recorded by the steward, the reeve, the bailiff. You answered carefully. Obligations unfulfilled invited fines, added labor, confiscation of tools, or worse. You didn't resist. The system was harsh but predictable. The system worked not because it was fair, but because it was stable. Rules were harsh but predictable. You knew what you owed and what was expected. Life was a steady rhythm of give, give, give. Occasionally, the Lord gave something back. A feast day, wave labor, a kind word. Never enough to balance the scales, but enough to prevent collapse. Your Lord could be young or old, kind or cruel, present or distant, but always above. You bowed, removed your cap, used the right words, not for friendship, but to avoid trouble. Perhaps, deep down, You hoped for recognition, a small reward, a moment of notice. Rarely it came, but the faint hope kept the system alive. Meanwhile, the steward walked, the reeve wrote, the mill ground. You dug your hands into soil year after year, season after season. There was no retirement, no bonus, no upward mobility. Only quiet knowledge that you fulfilled your role. Each year survived under the weight of another's title was itself a victory. Life persisted modest, constrained, steady. You prepared your fields, tended animals, mended roofs, and hoped for enough to survive the winter. Success wasn't celebrated. It was simply continuity, another day under the Lord's gaze. Long before the Black Death, peasants knew sickness well. Not the occasional seasonal illness, but the constant presence of something waiting to go wrong. Infection, fever, wasting, swelling, coughing. Disease was a feature of life. A small cut, a flea, a drink of water that looked clear but wasn't. It could bring you low. Unlike taxes or weather, illness didn't follow rules. It arrived silently, rarely left quietly, and spared no one. You didn't need grand catastrophes to confront mortality. Everyday life carried its own hazards. There were no hospitals, not really. If lucky, your village had a wise woman, a midwife, someone who knew which herbs to boil, which to burn. If extremely lucky, a nearby monk might offer literacy, well-meaning advice, slightly more effective than prayer alone. Remedies were simple, herbal decoctions, poultices, prayers. Healing was slow, uncertain, and fragile. Yet the presence of someone who understood these rhythms, someone who could ease fever or soothe pain, was priceless. The village leaned on their knowledge as much as on any tool or harvest. You learned to observe closely. Signs of infection, fever, swelling. Life depended on vigilance. Every cut, every rash, every cough mattered. Knowledge of the land, of herbs, of human bodies was survival. Children were taught young. Don't ignore swelling. Notice how fever rises. Act before it worsens. Life was fragile, yet patterns existed. Illness, like labor, followed rhythms, even if unpredictable. Survival required awareness, patience, and a careful touch. The smallest intervention could mean life instead of death. In the face of sickness, the village functioned as a single organism. Neighbors shared knowledge, labor, and vigilance. One family fell ill. Others tended animals, gathered water, ensured the fields didn't fail. Even simple tasks, fetching water, tending hearths, feeding animals, became communal acts of survival. Life depended not just on toil, but on connection. Without the quiet cooperation of others, the fragile routine could collapse. You learned early that survival was as much about the community as it was about strength, skill, or endurance. Seasons brought both rhythm and danger. Spring mud turned fields into quagmires. Summer heat sapped energy. Autumn storms flattened crops. Winter froze water and soil. Each season carried sickness in its own form. Damp air invited fever. Heat encouraged flies. Frost brought weakness. The village adapted slowly, year after year, through observation and effort. Life was a constant negotiation with the land and the weather, each season demanding new adjustments. Illness and fatigue were ever-present companions, waiting quietly for lapses in attention or strength. Despite the harshness, there was acceptance. You couldn't control disease, taxes, or the Lord's demands, but you could tend the hearth, mend the roof, prepare pottage, and care for children. You could observe, adapt, and endure. Life was precarious, repetitive, and modest, yet in this quiet acceptance, there was a strange peace. The daily routine, the rhythm of obligations, the vigilance against illness became the framework of life. You endured because you had to, and in enduring, you found a subtle strength few outside the village could understand. As night fell, the village exhaled. Fires dimmed, animals settled. Wind whispered through thatched roofs. You lay on straw beds, exhausted but alive, reflecting on the day. Labor done, obligations met, illnesses managed, survival continued. Another day passed, another year in rhythm with seasons, obligations in the land. Life was neither grand nor easy, but it was steady. The Lord's gaze remained above. The steward walked, the mill turned, and you persisted. Endurance itself was a quiet triumph, a testament to human resilience in the small, relentless world of a medieval village. But for the most part, when you got sick, you stayed home. You lay in bed, sweating through your shirt, hoping no one understood germs, microscoped for centuries away. Theories were confusing and often wrong. Some blamed bad air, smoke, rot, manure, dangerous, yes, but for reasons unknown. To combat it, people stuffed herbs into their clothes, carried flowers, or pressed vinegar-soaked rags to their faces. Others blamed divine punishment. Sin, disobedience, moral decay. Children falling ill, crops failing, bodies failing. It was probably your fault, your neighbors, or both. Local traditions filled the gaps. Some believed illness came from the evil eye, moon phases, animal spirits, or grumpy saints. A popular notion: sickness entered through the soles of the feet. The remedy? Boil them. If that failed, burn nearby objects, sometimes the mattress itself. Causes were strange, cures stranger. When someone had a fever, they might be bled. Leeches, sharp stones, or herbs wrapped in cloth were used. Humors, blood, phlegm, yellow and black bile, were blamed for everything. Misaligned humors demanded treatment, whether effective or not. The cures were bizarre, but offered hope. Swelling treated with mashed herbs, mud, or bread tied to the body. Stomach aches soothed by chewing charcoal. Coughing blood might be treated with wine, mixed with crushed pearls. Eyes blurred, a whispered prayer with smoke over the head. A blackened leg meant few options left. Plague amulets, metal or bone, sometimes blessed by priests, hung around necks. Onions buried in corners, garlic above doors. A live chicken tied to an infected limb. Rarely effective, but people clung to hope, however small. Sickness wasn't isolated like modern quarantines. You didn't call for help. You worked until you couldn't. When collapse came, you lay down while others carried on. Children were fed, animals tended, a simple broth offered. Prayers were murmured. Sometimes, the fever broke, swelling receded, and you walked again, perhaps a limp and a newfound respect for warm soup. Other times, it didn't end well, and your family lit candles in remembrance. Life was fragile, but carried on regardless. Plague wasn't always dramatic. More often, it was slow. Skin darkening, limbs swelling, deep coughs, smallpox, leprosy, dysentery. Even influenza could confine half a village to their beds. Days blurred into weeks, strength waning, chores unattended. Survival required endurance, careful observation, and support of others. Life in the village was a delicate balance between toil and vulnerability. Illness was simply another rhythm in the cycle, another test of human endurance, patience, and resilience. Villagers developed coping mechanisms: herbal tonics, prayers, amulets, practical care, and ritual. Baths were rare, cleanliness a seasonal effort. Wells and rivers were shared resources, often unsafe. You boiled water when possible, filtered through cloth, or relied on small ale to dull disease risks. Life was improvised constantly. Knowledge was passed orally. Which herb cured which fever, which prayers soothed coughs, which meals kept strength. Every day was a lesson in observation, experimentation, and adaptation. Fear was constant but quiet. Every cough, every rash, every unusual color in the skin prompted vigilance. Children learned early, watch closely, act fast. Illness could sweep through the village silently, leaving weakened bodies in its path. Survival demanded awareness and caution, but also the ability to continue daily life despite risk. The rhythm of labor, care, and observation became a fragile but vital structure for enduring the unpredictability of disease. The village operated as a single organism. One family sick, others stepped in, milking cows, feeding animals, preparing food. Knowledge was shared, tasks divided. Illness tested the collective resilience. Without the quiet cooperation of neighbors, a single sickness could cause cascading hardship. Life was precarious, yet patterns existed. Work, care, observation, adaptation. These small acts sustained community and ensured survival, even when the world beyond the trees seemed indifferent. Illness reminded you of fragility. Life could change in hours. One cut, one flea, one misstep could alter existence. But fragility also fostered resilience. You adapted to limitations, balanced caution with routine, and found ways to endure. Knowledge of herbs, observation of patterns, and community care became survival tools. Every small victory, a fever broken, a child fed, an animal tended, was a triumph over an unpredictable, often harsh world. Life was humble, but rich in endurance and quiet triumphs. As night fell, the village exhaled. Fires dimmed, animals settled, wind whispered through thatch. Sick or healthy, villagers rested. The rhythm of labor, obligation, and survival continued unbroken. Another day had passed, chores done, duties met, illness endured. Life was precarious, repetitive, modest, but steady. You survived. You endured. And in this quiet persistence, there was triumph. Another day completed, another cycle of work and care, another night reflection. The world outside might be vast and indifferent, but here, in this village, life continued. And for now, that was enough. There were no case numbers, no charts, just stories. A traveler said the cough started in a village last week. Or someone heard 3 children had died near the river. You paid attention. You boiled water, left herbs under doors, kept your distance. Death was not always feared, but recognized. People knew when it was near. Breathing slowed, skin cooled, eyes dulled. Soft prayers whispered by firelight were common. Life continued, but awareness of mortality shaped every movement, every care, every quiet glance across the fields. When the Black Death struck in the 14th century, it was unlike anything before. Violence, swiftness, and horror, buboes swelling in neck and groin, fever stealing minds. Blood darkened, bubbled. People died in hours or days. Entire villages disappeared. Fields lay untended, bells tolled too often. Some tried to flee, but disease outran feet. Others doubled prayers, whipped themselves, or blamed outsiders. Monks and priests vanished in droves. Funerals were skipped, bodies buried in mass graves, unnamed. Yet, life did not stop. Survival became routine, even in the shadow of catastrophe. People adapted. Cleaning became more frequent. Herbs were shared. Prayers whispered with care. Surviving one sickness gave hope of resisting the next. Children learned early which plants to avoid, which to boil, how to wrap wounds, how to wait out a fever. Knowledge became survival. And through it all, they continued, milking cows, tending animals, fixing fences. Each act, each day was a small victory. Survival was quiet resistance, a stubborn refusal to vanish without leaving a trace. Illness did not stop marriages, harvests, or meals. Life was slow, deliberate, filled with repetition and quiet observation. Stories were retold. The grandfather who survived a winter fever on garlic water, the neighbor who endured dysentery with stubbornness. Plague was part life, another rhythm to learn and endure. Villagers shared knowledge, supported one another, and adapted to the ever-present threat. Daily survival was a kind of victory, each small task an assertion of persistence against the fragility of existence. Night in the medieval countryside wasn't peaceful. It was silent the way a cave is silent, full of creaks, distant animal sounds, wind and thatch, and the quiet presence of life. You notice your own body, heartbeat, breath, shifting in straw. The dark was both threatening and familiar. Fires dimmed, animals settled. Villagers lay in their beds, listening to the same rhythms that had guided generations. Even in silence, life continued. Survival was not heroic. It was ordinary, enduring, and profoundly human. Death was remembered quietly in the actions of the living. You lit candles, whispered prayers, shared stories. Names were remembered when possible, or at least habits and small gestures. The way someone added rosemary to broth, how they repaired a fence, or milked a cow. Life and death intertwined. The absence of a body was not absence of memory. Survival was continuity, ensuring that those who passed left a trace through stories, routines, and care of the land. Routine became a shield. Daily chores, tending animals, preparing food, and keeping the fire alive were acts of resilience. The repetition of work, care, and observation built stability against a world that could change without warning. Seasons dictated tasks. The land dictated labor, and life proceeded in its measured pace. Even when sickness visited, the rhythm remained. The village moved as one, subtly resilient, quietly enduring, teaching each new generation the lessons of survival without fanfare. Observation became knowledge. A child watched elders milk, boil water, prepare food, and care for the sick. Each subtle gesture, each small technique was memorized and repeated. Patterns were noted. When a cough worsened, when fever broke, which herbs soothed, which behaviors invited risk. Knowledge was oral, practical, and immediate. Books were rare. Experience was everything. Every day, every action reinforced lessons learned through observation, trial, and quiet attention to the rhythms of the village and the cycles of life and illness. Villagers maintained vigilance. A cough, a rash, a swelling leg, noticed immediately. Families adjusted routines, shared tasks, and offered support. Illness was a communal responsibility, not a solitary one. Even small acts, placing herbs, adjusting fires, covering floors, were essential. The community learned to anticipate, adapt, and protect one another. In the quiet vigilance, life endured. Sickness was never fully defeated, but its impact was mitigated by cooperation, awareness, and shared knowledge passed down through generations. Through plague, famine, and the relentless rhythms of life, the village endured. Life was humble, repetitive, and fragile, yet profoundly resilient. Each day survived, each illness weathered, each harvest completed. These were victories. The Black Death could sweep through villages, yet routines, knowledge, and collective care ensured survival. Endurance became a quiet triumph, not celebrated, but lived. And as the sun rose over the same hills, the world continued, small, familiar, and known. Survival was not glory. It was continuity, presence, and the stubborn persistence of life. The day ended when light failed, and everything not already put away had to be managed quickly. Darkness shrank the world to the size of your half. No candles burned freely. Wax was too precious. Fires dimmed. Coals glowed softly. Sleep came in 2 acts. First sleep, then a waking period, then second sleep, drifted into first sleep soon after nightfall. Straw or feather mattresses or woven rushes, lumpy, shared. Everyone slept together, family, relatives, even animals, for warmth. Privacy was a luxury of the rich. Boundaries were secondary to survival. First sleep lasted hours, a soft, familiar darkness where breathing, warmth, and shared presence became the rhythm of life. Almost like clockwork, people woke at midnight. It wasn't disturbing, it was expected. Some prayed, others stirred coals, tended animals, or stepped outside into freezing air. Some whispered, others reflected. Dreams came vivid and meaningful. People believed this waking period opened a veil between living and dead, sacred and mundane. Dreams were remembered and discussed the next day as matters of consequence. The world was still quiet and sharp in focus, a moment of reflection and connection between the mundane and the mystical, between survival and imagination. The second sleep began deeper, slower. It tried to heal the body, soothe aches, cool blisters, and restore strength. If lucky, it was uninterrupted. If not, one lay still, waiting for dawn's excuse to rise. The home was never silent. Fires crackled, wind whispered through thatch. A baby fussed, a cow shuffled, coughs rattled. Everyone noticed, but no one spoke. Life continued even in sleep. Darkness was real and threatening, not just imagined. Wolves, thieves, fire, collapsing roofs, ghosts, spirits, witches. Danger was present, and ritual protected the household from them. Fear of the dark was real. Wolves howled near the village, their hunger audible, reminding all that danger was immediate. Thieves and rogues were possible. Fires could ignite from a stray coal. Roofs groaned under snow, and unseen forces were everywhere. Ghosts, spirits, witches were spoken of only in whispers. Each night required careful attention, rituals, and respect. Households prepared. Herbs placed strategically. Charms hung. Prayers murmured. Night was not simply rest. It was vigilance. Life continued, delicate, interwoven with danger and tradition. each act of protection a silent declaration of survival. To protect the household, rituals were performed. Herbs hung above doors, coins or charms placed at thresholds, prayers whispered before sleep. Certain objects had specific purposes. A knife above the door to ward spirits, a sprig of rosemary for health, garlic to keep disease away. Everyone participated, adults and children alike, learning to respect unseen forces. These rituals were not mere superstition. They were embedded in daily life, providing control over an unpredictable world. Even the smallest gestures mattered, turning fear into cautious action and ritual into security. Even in sleep, shared vigilance continued. Someone listened for wolf howls, another for the stir of animals, a third for the faintest sound of falling roof tile or intruder. Life and death were inseparable in these quiet hours. Children learned from adults, observing rituals, movements, and responses. Survival wasn't individual. It was collective. Every ear attuned, every eye half open. The village itself seemed alive at night, breathing, creaking, and watching, each household connected to the rhythms of threat and protection. Dreams held significance. Midnight waking was a threshold. Dreams might reveal hidden truths, messages from ancestors, warnings of danger, or glimpses of sacred. Stories of dreams passed through the village, shaping actions and attitudes. Children learned early to listen and interpret, to respect the messages of the subconscious. Dreaming became a practical skill, woven into daily life. Nighttime was not empty or idle. It was a bridge between past, present, and the unseen forces that shaped survival. The fire never fully died. Its glow defined the night, provided warmth, comfort, and vigilance. Coals were banked carefully. Sparks could ignite disaster. The hearth was the heart of the home, providing light, heat, and a gathering point. Tasks continued quietly around it, tending animals, boiling water, repairing tools, preparing small meals, or murmuring prayers. Life and survival were concentrated in the glow of the hearth, a symbol of continuity, endurance, and the intimate rhythm of the village at night. Winter nights were harsh. The cold seeped through walls, floors, and thatch. Bundled in wool blankets, pressed close for warmth, villagers endured. Even animals were brought in. Every movement was cautious, conserving heat. Doors latched, windows shuttered, straw beds arranged to retain warmth. Cold was constant, and comfort was minimal. Yet, humans adapted, shared warmth, vigilance, and small rituals transformed the cold from deadly to tolerable. Night was a test, a rhythm of survival that every generation learned and respected. Eventually, the second sleep ended. Dawn approached slowly, light softening the edges of the dark. The village stirred gently. Fires were rekindled, animals tended, chores resumed. Sleep, shared vigilance, rituals, and resilience carried villagers through another night. Life continued as it always had, fragile yet enduring. Each dawn was a quiet victory, a reaffirmation of survival, continuity, and the intimate, stubborn persistence of life on the edge of the medieval world. You placed iron by the door, made the sign of the cross above the hearth, whispered protective blessings over the straw mattress, hung herbs, rosemary, sage, rue, above entryways. Sometimes a bit of string was tied around a child's wrist. Families believed sleep left the soul vulnerable. Beds were oriented carefully, mirrors covered, feet away from doors. Clothing stayed on, layered wool and fur, boots sometimes left on. Sleeping was an act of endurance as much as rest. Shifts, murmurs, elbows, knees, and a family dog surprise were normal. Closeness was security. Dreams mattered. A wheat field promised prosperity. A snake, illness. A broken tooth, death. You either interpreted them yourself or sought someone in the village who could. Villagers had dream readers. The church warned some dreams came from the devil. Pray before sleep to protect the soul, because the night could be the last. Illness could strike while you rested. Fevers and coughs rose unseen. Morning confirmed survival. The coals were stirred, bodies counted, and life resumed. Dreams were shared and remembered, folded into daily life. Seasons shifted the rhythm of sleep. Winter brought long first sleep, summer shortened it, but the two-act sleep endured. Routine, endurance, and the small gifts of a quiet night became a way of life. When dawn came, the rooster crowed, Coals were rekindled, and survival was confirmed. Joints ached. The cold bit the nose. Water was fetched, bread prepared, animals fed. Dreams of the night were recounted, if significant. Life resumed with practical tasks. Hunger was a manageable companion. The day began not in comfort, but in duty, and every action reaffirmed resilience. The morning light was a reward, a sign that the night's dangers had passed, that everyone accounted for to continue another day. Some years brought hunger, others, famine. Hunger followed rules. Food ration, meals stretched, hope maintained. Famine broke all rules. Fields failed. Root cellars were bare. Food became an idea, a concept rather than a substance. Spring revealed signs. Too much rain or none, barley patchy. Beans flowering, then browning. Anxiety grew. Neighbors whispered, and families planned desperately. Survival was no longer routine. It demanded ingenuity, discipline, and a stubborn refusal to let despair dictate the day. Families rationed seeds and stored what little they could. Roots were dug carefully. Last grains measured meticulously. Meals shrank to near nothing. Herbs were boiled into every pot to stretch flavor. Livestock might be sold, slaughtered, or milk reserved for children. Every decision mattered. Community networks mattered, too. Neighbors shared what they could, warned of failing wells, pooled resources. Scarcity was not just hunger. It was a test of wit, endurance, and relationships. A missing loaf, a stolen egg, or a spoiled crop could ripple through the village for weeks. Work became more urgent. Fields had to be tended, even when there was little hope. Corvée labor for the Lord still demanded completion. The mill, oven, and taxes could not be delayed. Every shovel of soil, every bundle of firewood, every trip to the well carried weight. Famine made fatigue more dangerous. The body weakened by hunger needed more care. Yet work continued. Rhythm of survival stronger than pain. Physical labor became the language of persistence. Even as resources dwindled, the routine kept despair from fully taking hold. In famine, the village relied on each other. Shared meals, pooling firewood, warnings about failing wells or wild animals. Children learned early. Generosity could save a life. Elders mediated disputes, offered advice on rationing, or directed labor efficiently. Families formed chains of support, sometimes informal, sometimes forced by necessity. Human connections became the backbone of endurance. Survival was never solitary. Shared labor, shared meals, shared vigilance. The village persisted together, a fragile but resilient organism. Animals were not just food. They were tools and companions. Cows for milk, chickens for eggs, pigs for meat and fat. During famine, tough decisions were made. Milk might be rationed, eggs reserved for children, pigs culled strategically. Each action balanced immediate survival with long-term sustainability. The smallest miscalculation could doom a family. Watching livestock, measuring portions, and storing food carefully became daily acts of calculation and hope. Survival required constant assessment, weighing present needs against future possibility. Villagers read the land like a book. Clouds, wind, bird calls, soil texture, and plant growth revealed hints about rain, harvests, and famine. Observation was survival. Early frost, late rain, or a patch of blackened barley signaled adjustment. Learning the rhythms of weather, pests, and seasons wasn't a choice. It was instinct, passed through stories and apprenticeship. Knowledge became power. The more you understood, the more likely you could survive until next planting, next harvest, next spring. As dusk fell again, preparation began for another night. Fires banked, animals tended, herbs hung, and prayers whispered. Blankets layered. Feet away from doors. Dreams hoped to be kind. The cycle of first sleep, midnight waking, and second sleep awaited. Daylight and night were measured in work, observation, and survival, not hours. Each night was a rehearsal for endurance. Even in hardship, there was method, ritual, and quiet perseverance. Life persisted, shaped by necessity and a stubborn, shared humanity. The cabbages cracked open too early. The wheat heads stayed stunted, bowed like they were already mourning. You noticed. Everyone did. At first, no one said it, but the looks were exchanged. Calculations were made quietly. How much was left from last year? How much seed to save? How much to eat? The answers were never good. Summer brought the cruelest decisions. Plant the seeds or grind them into flour. Feed your child one more bowl, or save for a harvest that might never come. Portions shrank. The stew thinned. Bread got smaller. Each crumb swept up with reverence. Hunger was patient. So were you. By August, the truth became harder to ignore. By September, impossible. You stopped feeding the animals first. Chickens grew silent. Goats became hollow. Dogs, if you had one, followed closely, eyes wary. Bread became ritual. One loaf split 5 ways. Stew was mostly water, flavored with boiled weeds and ground roots. Children asked fewer questions. They sat by the fire, learning how to wait. The village itself went quiet. No laughter, no sheep disputes. Only the occasional cough, the crack of firewood. Silence became the language of famine. Sometimes a neighbor brought a rabbit, a bird, or acorns to soak and grind. You chewed even when bitter, smiled because it was something. The manor steward came less often. Good, because he didn't take. Bad, because he didn't help. The church distributed bread after Mass, offered alms to the poorest. But even they were stretched thin. You prayed more, not for faith, but out of repetition. Words filled the empty hours when your hands were too tired to do anything else. Some left the village entirely, seeking food, work, or God. Some returned, some didn't. You didn't ask. You were too tired. The body changes in famine. You feel your ribs from within, standing slower, bruising easier. Hands weight clenched as if gripping tools you cannot use. Cold bites harder. The fire becomes your best friend. You tend it more than you cook on it. You sit close, sleep facing it, feeding it even as your belly goes empty. Heat is the last luxury you can provide, the last comfort you can control. Hunger has rules. Famine has none. By now, everything edible had been eaten. Roots, weeds, dried beans, stale flour. Bones boiled 3 times, the marrow stripped. You found ways to stretch water, ferment dregs of ale, turn ashes into a faint flavor for bread. Ingenuity was survival. Every action required calculation. A pinch of flour here, a few beans there, nothing wasted. The mundane became critical. Each task carried weight. Even small victories, a pot that didn't crack, a fire that didn't die, were celebrated silently. The village pulled together. Even as the world grew thinner, shared meals became rarer, but generosity persisted. A scrap of bread, a handful of dried beans. Everyone knew scarcity, yet some small kindness survived. Still, isolation was real. Neighbors seldom left their homes. Lanes were empty. Life shrank to the size of your hut, your fire, your few possessions. Silence pressed against walls. Survival became less about abundance and more about endurance, persistence, and quiet cooperation. Emotions were muted by exhaustion. Joy came rarely, and when it did, it was fleeting. A single well-cooked meal, a warm fire, a rabbit found, a neighbor's cautious smile. You learned to survive in the margins of hope, finding satisfaction in tiny, often overlooked victories. Complaints were few, energy was spent elsewhere. Silence became companionable. Children adapted faster than adults, their quiet resilience teaching you lessons you were too weary to articulate. Every day, the same task demanded attention. Water carried, fire stoked, animals fed, stew stirred. Repetition became rhythm, rhythm became endurance. You checked on neighbors, silently, watched over children, tended the sick. Famine made nothing frivolous. Survival depended on constant vigilance. The mind was sharp where the body was weak. Every movement had purpose. Laziness could be fatal. The mundane became sacred. Labor was prayer, care was hope, and endurance was the highest virtue. Even with diligence, death walked close. Fever, malnutrition, infection claimed silently. Smallpox, dysentery, and coughs marked the weak. Bodies wasted, eyes dulled, steps slowed. You observed, you prepared. Candles, herbs, prayers, whispered blessings. They were all attempts to hold back inevitability. You buried quietly, marked places with stones or sticks. Life and death were neighbors, separated only by your endurance, your vigilance, your will to tend the fire one more day. Famine was a teacher. It taught endurance, ingenuity, patience, and humility. It reshaped bodies and minds. It tested the bonds of family and village. It revealed the limits of hope and the necessity of routine. Hunger became a daily companion, a measured time, a reminder that survival was never guaranteed. Yet through all of it you endured. You fed the fire, shared the scraps, counted the living, and continued. Life did not stop because hunger came. It continued, stubborn and slow, teaching you, shaping you, reminding you that even in scarcity, there was a rhythm to follow. You've soaked bark. You've baked famine bread that cracked your tooth. When the food was gone, you looked at things that weren't food but might become it. Leeks, boiled and salted. Not delicious, not satisfying, but chewable. You found a rat once. You didn't scream. You thanked God. Then you hid it, cooked it alone, told no one. You felt guilty, but not regretful. Dreams became strange. Feasts, tables full of roast and bread and wine. You woke chewing your tongue. You dreamed of boiling endlessly, of animals returning, of green shoots breaking through snow, of childhood when hunger was simpler. Some nights you dreamed of being full. You woke crying. The graveyard grew slowly, then too quickly to keep up. You knew someone had died when the church bell didn't ring. There weren't enough hands to lift the rope. Graves were shallow, prayers short, mourning silent. Everyone had hunger to manage. You wanted to grieve, but held it back, like everything else. Then, like every famine, it ended, not suddenly, but steadily. Rain came, seeds germinated, plants reached up, weak but real. Energy returned. You could hope again. You saved the first harvest for others. Children first, elders next. You took the smallest bowl. You smiled passing along. The first good loaf came out of the oven, cracked on top, dark below. You stared before eating. You remembered every day you went without, every trick you used, every lie told to spare someone else. You ate slowly. This time it filled you. Hunger taught lessons you never forgot. By the time you could walk, the church had marked you. Baptism, Latin prayers, your soul stitched into a system beyond the village. The church wasn't just a building. It was the air, the road, the rhythm of your year. It judged, taxed, forgave, and defined what came after. In quiet early mornings, you felt its presence like gravity. In wet nights, wind through shutters, it organized your life, unseen yet unyielding. The village priest, often the only literate person, was more than confessor. He was your calendar, counselor, oracle. He knew the sky, the saints, the pigs that died, storms that came. He walked through the village carrying blessing and threat alike. You whispered your sins, hoping he wouldn't look disappointed. You saw him at birth, marriage, death, your only guaranteed ceremonies. In between, he spoke for a God feared more than loved. Love required obedience. Latin was the language of the Mass, a spell you could not understand. Standing beside family, feet numb, words flowed without belonging to you. When the priest lifted the bread, you believed, or tried to, that it wasn't bread, that the wine wasn't wine. You mouthed along where you could, letting the ritual move through you. Obedience and hope intertwined. The invisible felt tangible, though you could not name it. Life wasn't suspended by the church. It was framed by it. Work returned between ceremonies. Water fetched, fire tended, bread baked, animals fed. Ritual threaded through every act. Prayers before meals, blessings over seeds, murmured Latin for the sick. Faith became habit, structure, survival. You obeyed not for love, but because everything else depended on it. Obedience kept fire burning. Children alive, body fed, and soul, at least in part, connected to something beyond hunger and frost. You observed the priest, learned the calendar of saints, the phases of moon, which prayers soothed the sick, which rituals encouraged growth in the fields. He spoke of distant worlds, heaven, saints, miracles, but you translated them into survival. Blessings for crops, for livestock, for children. Faith became practical knowledge, a guide to life's uncertainties. The intangible became instructions. Ritual became rhythm. You endured, you adapted, you continued. Even mundane tasks carry divine undertones. Stirring stew, sweeping floors, tending fire, gathering water. Each act framed by prayer or habit. You muttered Latin phrases without understanding, blessed the livestock, touched holy symbols. Life and faith intertwined. Obedience and routine were inseparable. The village, the manor, the church, all part of a system larger than yourself, demanding participation. Survival wasn't just physical. It was spiritual adherence, measured in small acts repeated daily. The church was not a spectator. It was present in every corner, every hour. Birth, death, famine, feast. It watched. It counted, judged, structured, and endured alongside you. And in that constant presence, you learned to exist, to bend but not break, to hope when little was left, to obey when resistance was dangerous, to survive when survival was rare. In its shadow, you moved through life, carrying hunger, labor, and faith, the rhythms of the village shaping each step, each breath. You crossed yourself when the others did. You learned the rhythm of holiness like someone learns a path to a well, not every step, but knowing you needed it. The church carved the year into sacred pieces. Lent, Advent, Epiphany, All Saints. You didn't say March or April. You said after Easter or near St. Michael's. It told you when to fast, when to feast, and how guilty you should feel enjoying it. 40 days without meat, followed by a dizzying feast. Friday fish, even far from water. Almond milk for the wealthy. Turnips and cold broth for everyone else. Even when your bowl was empty, your plate was full of rules. Your calendar wasn't just for prayer. It was for payment. The church collected a tenth of your yield. Grain, eggs, wool, chicken, cider. If it came from your field or your body, it had a price. You gave because it was God's portion. But God didn't collect it. The priest did, or the steward with his ledgers and silent nods. Your best barley was carted off to the tithe barn, always bigger than your home. Neighbors handed over their last sack of oats while the priest prayed for mercy they had just paid for. When harvest failed, rains too late, frost too early, the demand didn't change. You owed what you owed. Sometimes they accepted candles or labor. Sometimes they didn't. Sometimes the debt bent your back even when standing upright. Yet, the church didn't just take. It gave stories, structure, reasons. When a cow died without cause, the priest told you which saint to pray to. When a child fell ill, it might be a test, a punishment, or the devil slipping in. He offered blessings, sacraments, a candle, a shrine visit. There were saints for everything. Saint Apollonia for teeth, Saint Isidore for plowing, Saint Sebastian for plague. You didn't know where they were buried, or when they lived. You only knew their names and what they could fix. Their stories were half memory, half magic, told by firelight by people unsure where truth ended and legend began. You called on them when you had nothing else, whispering names while stirring the pot or kneeling in the field. You made deals, bread, fasting, pilgrimage, if only they'd helped us once. Sometimes they did, or seemed to. That was enough. Pilgrimage was holy, but also a way to leave. For a few days, you stepped outside the same 5 miles you'd lived all your life. You walked roads you didn't know, towards shrines you'd only heard of. You carried prayers strapped to your back or clutched in your hands. You slept under hedges or in barn corners. You arrived footsore and tired, still before a bone or statue, hoping something would shift inside you. Sometimes it did. You returned not healed, but changed, or at least convinced you had been. Even death was choreographed by the church. When you felt it near, you sent for the priest. The rites began, prayers whispered at bedside, holy water sprinkled, blessings murmured over lips. Family gathered, fear and reverence mingling. Death was not sudden in ceremony. It was observed, recorded, shaped into order. The priest guided hands and words. You obeyed because it mattered, not because it comforted. Even the dying knew the ritual gave their passing meaning within the system of church and village. The burial was quiet, solemn, bound by the church's rules. Graves measured, prayers chanted, the body lowered, dirt packed carefully. Everyone understood their role. Everyone observed. Even in sorrow, the rhythm persisted. The village continued. Animals fed, stew stirred, coals tended. Life did not pause for grief, but grief existed within it. The church gave form to passing, marking a line between living and dead, ordinary and sacred. You remembered the saints and the stories. You remembered rituals. Their presence was a scaffolding for life's fragility. Even if prayers didn't change outcomes, they shaped action, gave reason for endurance. Saints became companions, guides, and symbols. You didn't always understand why they worked, only that invoking them mattered. The village breathed with their memory, living alongside the sacred as if it were part of the earth and wind themselves. Every act became entwined with faith, sweeping the floor, tending fire, milking cows, pulling weeds, each layered with prayer or ritual. Latin phrases muttered, crosses made, blessings over animals. Life and religion were inseparable. Obedience and routine kept you alive, kept the fire burning, children fed, soul connected to something beyond frost and hunger. The church's reach was infinite in the smallness of your daily actions. The church was always present, not passive. It structured life from birth to death, famine to feast, hope to despair. In its shadow, you learned to endure, to bend but not break, to hope when little remained, to obey when resistance was dangerous, to survive when survival was rare. The village moved in rhythm with its presence, the seasons, the saints, the priests, and your labor. Hunger, cold, sickness, toil, they were measured and endured together. And through it all, life continued, shaped by the constant, watchful presence of faith. He came with oil and words. He touched your forehead, prayed over your body, tried to ease your soul into what came next. Your family gathered. Candles were lit. The bell might ring if someone had the strength. You were buried on sacred ground beside others who had walked the same path. Then came the masses. Your family paid for prayers, lit more candles, hoping the priest remembered your name in his chants. Even in death, there were debts. The church taught that your soul might linger in purgatory, a shadowed hallway between suffering and salvation. You could wait there for years or centuries unless someone helped. Unless someone prayed, paid, lit enough candles, said your name often enough to pull you through. The poor gave bread, the rich gave land, all to shorten a stay in a place unseen but feared. Fear, too, was part of the church's gift. The church explained the world when no one else could. Why rains failed, why a child in wake, why illness took the young and spared the cruel. It told you suffering had purpose, obedience had reward. It gave structure amid chaos. Not comfort, always, but peace. You never questioned its power. Not seriously, not out loud. Grumbling might happen, cursing when the priest looked away. But you never stopped kneeling, crossing yourself, showing up. Even when you didn't understand Latin, you understood the structure. Staying inside it was the only way forward. Belief was less about thought than action. When you died, you hoped the bells would ring, candles burn, your name spoken enough to matter. You hoped saints still listened. You hoped sins had been counted and forgiven. You hoped the church, with its weight, dust, and gold, would carry you the rest of the way. You might think after everything, peasants would rise. Centuries of suffering could crack villages, set fire to fields, make hearts rebel. But they didn't. Not often, not for long, never all at once. There were revolts. The English peasants' revolt of 1381, the Jacquerie in France. But these sparks burned fast and were snuffed out faster. Tax collectors' houses burned. Stewards chased off. Banners lifted. Then executions followed. The world didn't change. Grain still had to be sown. Peasants didn't revolt because they were naive or cowardly. They were survivors, not of single tragedies, but unbroken hardships sustained year after year. They lived in low ceilings where hope was rationed like grain. They didn't lack courage. They lacked the luxury to gamble their lives for abstract justice. Survival required calculation, endurance, and quiet cunning. Every day, a choice between life and defiance, and life often won. Hope existed, but it was measured. You rationed it like food. A small dream of better harvest, a child surviving fever, a safe passage through winter. Too much hope could be dangerous. It could make you careless. You saved courage for the moments that demanded it. fleeing the plague, sneaking grain, praying fiercely. The rest was endurance, quiet persistence, the unseen resistance of staying alive. Endurance became resistance. Every day you woke, fed your family, plowed the field, boiled water, survived another night. The system of lords, taxes, the church, disease, and famine demanded obedience. And yet, simply surviving, claiming tomorrow, was rebellion of its own kind. It was quiet, unnoticed, uncelebrated, but it was real. The church's weight pressed on you, but it also guided you. Saints, prayers, rituals, they were companions in the grind. You didn't always believe, not fully, but you acted as if you did. It gave rhythm to labor, reason for hardship, a framework in which to endure. And in the end, it was enough. Enough to rise with the sun, enough to plant the seed, enough to hope that one day the fire might burn a little longer. History bore down on you, unbroken centuries of harvest and famine, taxes and tithes, plagues and priests. You carried it in your back, your hands, your belly, your bones. And still, you move forward. One day at a time, one winter, one harvest, one prayer. The world could be cruel, chaotic, unforgiving, but it could also be endured. That was the peasants' power. Not in revolt, not in conquest, but in the quiet mastery of survival. They lacked margin. In a life where every day was spent to try and keep the roof patched and the soup warm, there was no space left for rebellion. You could plan a revolt, or you could dig potatoes. You couldn't do both. The system worked not because it was just or kind, but because it was ancient, sunk into the habits of generations. You owed labor, grain, the church its tenth, the Lord his harvest. You were born into that owing. Unless you were lucky, you died in it too. The cost of stepping outside the rules was too high. The manor had soldiers. The church had excommunication. The king had laws that still bound you. The penalty for defiance wasn't always death. Sometimes it was worse. Banishment, starvation, family left to carry your debt. Stories of fathers taken, mothers whipped, cousins disappearing circulated, not to incite revolt, but to prevent it. Rebellion was difficult because your neighbors were also your kin. You shared fields, tools, fences, prayers. Even if you hated the steward, you might still marry his daughter. Even if you resented the tithe, you still brought bread to Mass. The village couldn't be torn apart without tearing yourself apart. To revolt against the manor was, in some way, to revolt against the rhythms of your own life. Centuries later, it's easy to imagine the peasant as eternally submissive, head bowed, hat in hand. But submission wasn't servitude. It was negotiation. Peasants didn't simply suffer. They adapted. They bartered. They bent. A pig kept off the ledger, a sack of rye buried in the earth, a bribe given in eggs rather than coin. These were rebellions they could afford. Peasants were practical people. Their world was governed by weather, not ideology. The question wasn't what was just, but what would feed them through winter. Justice, if it ever came, was a luxury they didn't trust. Lords changed, priests were replaced, rules shifted. But the wind still blew. Soil still needed turning. Children still cried from hunger. You didn't revolt against that. You endured. The church played its part, perhaps more effectively than the sword. It taught that suffering was holy, endurance righteous, that the meek would inherit the earth, though it never said when. Your trials weren't punishment but purification. Obedience would be rewarded, not here, but in the next life. And if heaven's promise was enough, the threat of hell filled the rest. Fire, torment, gnashing teeth, waiting for the proud and rebellious. And yet, peasants were not passive. Their resistance was quieter. They gossiped about stewards, sang rude songs about the Lord habits, laughed when the priest stumbled on a sermon. Subtle defiance existed in words, gestures, and small acts of cleverness. Never enough to topple the system, but enough to reclaim a sliver of dignity. They bargained with what they had. Eggs for tools, extra vegetables hidden from collection. Favors exchanged quietly. Life itself was a negotiation. Survival versus obedience. Sustenance versus punishment. The world was a ledger, and the peasant had learned to balance it, day by day, season by season. Weather mattered more than laws, harvest more than decrees. A late frost, a heavy rain, a stunted crop. They governed life more than a king or lord could. Every survival decision hinged on wind, sun, and soil. Revolt was luxury. Endurance was necessity. To survive was to measure each day in grains, each week in meals, each season in hope. In the end, endurance became the peasant's power. Not in revolt, not in conquest, but in the quiet mastery of survival, living within the system's weight, finding cracks to breathe through, keeping family alive, planting seeds, cooking meals, whispering prayers, hiding what was needed to survive. This was rebellion. This was life. This was how they claimed tomorrow without ever changing the world above them. They told stories at night of better days and better men. They found dignity in the smallest acts, a shared crust, a well-timed silence, a field tended just a little differently than the rule book said. Their rebellion was in the way they survived despite it all. Not because they accepted the system, but because they made it bend just enough to let them breathe. Sometimes things changed. A lord died and his son was kinder. A new bishop forgave debts. A terrible storm reminded the powerful that even they were mortal, but change came from above. The peasant's job was to wait, to endure, to hand down what little they had, and teach their children to be quiet when needed, brave when possible. And there were dreams. You might not call them revolution, but you thought of a different life. A day when your child wouldn't bear the same burdens, when your back wouldn't ache before 30, when sleep came without worry of wolves, soldiers, or winter. Dreams kept you going, living beside reality. You didn't expect them to come true. You needed them to survive. Perhaps most astonishingly, peasants kept their culture, faith, and families intact despite the weight of the system. Songs were passed down, stories whispered, knowledge of plants, prayers, childbirth, and burial preserved. Continuity outlasting kings and crusades, not through banners or battles, but through persistence. When the manner demanded too much, they survived anyway. When the church taxed their sins, they still lit candles. When the world turned against them, they huddled close and waited for spring. The soil remembered their hands, even if they didn't own it. Persistence was their rebellion. Revolution didn't live in them like it would in later centuries in slogans and speeches. But there was strength in enduring. To live hardship without letting it harden you completely. To kneel not out of weakness, but knowing you could rise again tomorrow. That too was a form of resistance. They endured quietly in the rhythm of the plow. Smoke rising from cottages at dusk. Lullabies beside dying fires. In stories whispered to children, passed down to the next generation. They persisted. History often forgets them, folding them beneath kings and conquests, but they were the thread that held the tapestry together. Without them, there would have been no harvests, no cathedrals, no armies to march under banners. They built the world even as they were kept from owning it. They may not have overturned their lords, but they outlasted them, and maybe that is revolution enough. Every small act, planting a seed, sharing a loaf, telling a story, was a choice, a refusal to be entirely crushed by the system, a life of quiet defiance, unrecorded, uncelebrated, yet profoundly effective. And so the peasants endured. Through famine, plague, tides, and the weight of authority, they persisted. Their legacy was not monuments or glory, but survival, continuity, and the quiet shaping of the world through ordinary lives. That endurance, that stubborn refusal to be erased, was their triumph.